PvP, especially for new players in Guild Wars 2, can be quite overwhelming, because it has so many different aspects that are not easily described in one video. Today I want to take a look at what PvP roles are, and how they are defined, what they have to be, and especially what typical builds are run, and how you can perform on that to fit the role. I'm Surma, and without much further ado, let's jump right in. So before I get into the typical roles, I want to mention that, of course, there are no really rigid roles. For example, there are builds that can fit multiple roles, that can, especially in ranked play, perform different roles if they are required to. But most builds fit in one role only, and you should know when you play a build what role you are supposed to fill, so that you can do this job. Because if you try a job of another role, and you will not most likely succeed, but you will also probably have problems or face issues because other builds are just better at it. And of course, most of those roles are even more important in competitive play, so high level ranked, of course, but also really important in ATs, where you have a 5-person team or 2v, let's say, really important teammates, so you always have to know which team comp you are going for. Of course, in ranked you can't influence that much, but you should be aware that, of course, if you have 5 side in order, it's rather unlikely that you will win the match. The same would be true if you have 5 supporter in a ranked match. It's rather unlikely to win, you know. So in team play, if you have a 5-person team, you should always think that the composition is important, but in ranked you should more think about your own role that you have and try to fill it. You can't change the other 4 people, or at least the other 3 if you are in a duo queue. The background footage is always corresponding to the role that we are currently discussing. With that out of the way, let's go into the first role. So the first role is the Teamfighter. It's really straightforward what the Teamfighter does. Teamfighter wants to be in a teamfight. Teamfights are typically considered at least a 2v2, most of the time even 3v3s and more. And the Teamfighter is just a class or a typical role that is not focused on having heavy mobility. It's more focused on having damage, a lot of damage, consistent damage, most likely also AoE pressure. It doesn't matter if it's power or condi. And you are sacrificing a lot of your own sustain to trade off for a really good DPS. Typical classes, for example, would be Necromancer, because Reaper, for example, or even Power Reaper, Condi Reaper, all of them, because they are quite squishy themselves, or at least quite slow. They have some inherent, let's say, tankiness, but they are heavily reliant on heal and support by allies, because they don't have that much sustain themselves. But they have heavy amounts of damage over time, so it's very likely that you win the team fight if you have a support and the enemy team doesn't, because you just deal out more damage over time. So that's the typical teamfight role. You don't want to rotate that much, you just want to fight in a large fight, win those, and go to the next large fight. You don't want to go from one node to another all the time, because you are too slow to do that. You will just waste your time, and of course you have to kite a lot on this role, because you are slow. A lot of people will target you because you are the primary damage dealer in the team. So that's always what you should expect. You are the best target for the enemy team, should always think about that, and then try to disengage if you are really the target focused, and of course try to counter pressure, so you are a really important component of the team. The next role is also really important, and of course I also already mentioned it, is the supporter. So this one goes hand in hand with the Teamfighter. Whenever you have a Teamfighter, there should be a support. Of course you can play a support without a Teamfighter, or a Teamfighter without a support, but they are way worse then, because only together they have a huge amount of damage and a huge amount of sustain. So the support is not only supporting by healing, but some supporters even have resurrection skills, which is really important. For example, if you get cleaved in a team fight, then it's really unlikely that you get the hand rest, so that by pressing F, sometimes you can use then the glyph to carry the fight. Other support capabilities of the supporter are, of course, wounds, like stability, for example, but also alacrity and quickness can be really good. And of course, that's not to be underestimated, the healing, of course. Of course, another thing that a supporter should do is bring cleanses to the table. But, and it's a really underrated part as well, is the CC abilities, so route controls that can deny damage on your team, or even get some kills if you do it correctly. Examples of that would, for example, be Aftershock on Elementalist, on Tempest, or Guardian Walls. Or even if you're playing Druid, you can have some nasty mobs there as well. So there are different classes, I already mentioned some of them. Core Guardian, Firebrand, of course Support Chronomancer, and Tempest with Staff or with Dagger Focus. All of them are valid choices. Depends on the meta, which is currently the best. But all of them fill the same niche, so to say. They want to have the only support in the team. Most of the time, especially in ranked, you want to be in the team fight, you want to help your team, you don't want to be alone. You most of the time also don't want to be in a 2v2. But the difference between a team fighter and a supporter in this sense is that the supporter also can leave to support other teammates on other nodes if they see it's really necessary. Team fighter is too slow for that. Most supporters actually can do that because they have enough mobility. So always think about that. If you're a supporter, you can also rotate out of the team fight if it's necessary. That's really important. And also, the choice if you want to play support is often defined on the map, because some maps are more teamfight oriented, like Capricorn or maybe even Skyhammer. And of course, small maps like Legacy or Kylo, there can be support can be quite valuable because you can easily rotate from one point to another, and there are not that many, let's say, points that you have to contest. The only map where I would say you should probably in ranked matches never go for support is Temple, just because Temple has the possibilities of having 5 nodes to contest because of the buffs, and then you should not go for support, because then you sometimes have the situation where you are in a 1-on-1 as a support where you never want to be. That's a really bad spot. So that is for support. The next role would be the Duelists. And it's already in the name. Your role is to just duel if you can manage it. You go for a node. Most of the time you go for the close or the far node. And then you just want to have a duel there, win the 1-on-1 that you get, because your build is specialized in dealing good damage. Most of the time you are some kind of bruiser, and still having enough sustain and defense to tank some damage and also win the 1-on-1 after some time. And then you get the cap, and that's what you, let's say, supposed to do. You don't want to be in a team fight most of the time because your class is not designed like that, or your build at least. Typical builds like that would be all warrior builds most of the time. And Ranger, for example, also Dagger Catalyst can be a really nice build. And that's it for the typical classes most of the time. And you also have to be aware that you are not only dueling, so it's not only a fair duel. Oftentimes you get outnumbered from either team, which means you have to take advantage of that if it's your own team that is outnumbering you. But you should also be aware that oftentimes, for example, a thief or someone engages on you from the enemy team and you're in a 1v2, and you should not die in this 1v2. That's the most important thing that you have to do as a duelist. Don't die, because if you die even after 30 seconds or something, the enemy team got value from outnumbering you. If you can sustain yourself for 2 minutes or something in the 1v2, yes, you get value and your team is outnumbering on the map. That's good. But for the most part, you have to think about, if you die in a amount of 30 seconds or something, that's not worth it. You should always think about surviving as a duelist. That's why a lot of builds are the bruisers, the playstyle, because only then you can survive outnumbered situations. Another important part here is that you have to kite a lot, because you're a duelist. You want to sustain yourself, and you can only do that if you are not standing on point permanently, because there you are easy targets. So always think about kiting and knowing your build's potential when you can turn back and deal damage. So that's it for the duelists. And last really important role, really major role, is the roamer. So the roamer is, let's say, a typical build that is quite fast paced. It's not, let's say, a build that deals as much damage as a teamfighter most of the time. It can be, but the most important part here is that you roam between the nodes. So you deal damage, and when you don't have any cooldowns or you were successful and you got the kill, you rotate to another node. That's really important, and on this you will teamfight to some extent as well, but you will leave the teamfight if you can get an easy outnumber on your close or far point where the duelist is, for example. And you are really important for the team because you are, so to say, the playmaker. You make, let's say, the decisions when to leave the fight and stuff, because the team fight might be a really long drawn out fight, and you can swing the duel on the close or far node. That's probably also quite long and also drawn out. And you can swing both of those fights if you leave and come back in the correct time, the correct moment. That's really important. And typical builds, for example, would be Willbender, a lot of Revenant builds. Also, all classes can actually play some roaming build. The important part here is to understand you have to deal damage, but you of course also want to be, if you're getting focused, you want to survive as well. That's true for all builds. And also a really important roamer, of course, are thieves. They are probably one of the best roamers. They can also go for decaps really easily, just because they are the fastest class in the game. So think always about that, because a roamer is not only fighting, it's also about decapping if they see the opportunity to do this. So a typical team composition would often be one team fighter, one supporter, one or two side noder, and one or two roamers. Of course, that can differ from team to team, especially in ATs. There will be some experimental approaches, but this is the classical setup, so to say. You never have more than one supporter. There are some French combinations where you have one real supporter and two half supports or something, but most of the time that's not the case. And the typical, you also don't want to have more than one thief most of the time if it's not broken, because it's just not good at holding points. So the duelists can hold nodes as well as the team fighters, but roamers are a little bit harder to hold nodes on, especially against good people and duelists, for example. It's really hard to win on a roamer, so you should always be aware on that. So that's it. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.